that. Good evening. Thank you. I do that to my students as well, so don't feel too special about that. My name is Dan Spencer, and I teach here in the Environmental Studies program, and I'm really delighted to welcome you all here for the evening presentation here, Living with Consequences of U.S. Policy, a Nicaragua Photo and Testimony Project by Paul Dix and Pam Fitzpatrick. I'll be introducing them in their talk in just a moment here, but I want to thank several people here and organizations. This evening has come together by the efforts of many different folks. We have a lot of different people who've helped to co-sponsor that, including the Environmental Studies Project program here at the university, Community Action for Justice in the Americas, or CAHA. They will have a table out in front there if you want more information about their work afterwards. The Environmental Action Community here at the university. The Montana Human Rights Network is very generous. The University of Montana Political Science Department, I saw Paul Haber is out here in the audience. We got several folks from there. The Missoula Friends Quaker community, you already heard a little bit about. We have several friends here tonight, Quaker friends. Jubilee Montana Network, Father Jim Hogan, the School of Journalism here at the University of Montana, and Lutheran Campus Ministry all have officially pitched in to co-sponsor the evening and make it possible. So I really want to thank them. So let's take a moment and thank our co-sponsors. A couple people I also want to acknowledge the spectacular flyers that you've been seeing around the community around town. Abby Barenbeck here put together with Paul's photographs, did a really nice job on that. And then Aaron Couts has been my right-hand partner through all of this here from the beginning and putting all the organization together. Aaron's done a lot of work right up until about 20 minutes ago, so we'll continue working in the evening, so thank you also, Aaron. And one other thing, we'll have some announcements afterwards as well, but Paul and Pam are going to be showing the effects of U.S. policy in Central America, focusing on Nicaragua. But we also have a lot of opportunities here at the university for students to travel to these areas here. And I want to mention a couple of different possibilities now. Paul Haber has a wonderful program in Mexico during the summers. And Paul, would you just identify yourself? Because if you're interested, talk to Paul afterwards. This is a terrific program in Mexico that looks at lots of different facets of Mexican society, political science events. And then I will be taking a trip to Guatemala for 2 weeks. It goes at the end of May and the beginning of June, focusing on environmental justice, human rights, and sustainable development. There are brochures and flyers about that trip up on the table in front here. And I'll also be having an informational meeting this coming Thursday evening at 6 o'clock in the Honors College. So if you think you might be interested, that's open to members of the community as well as the students. If you think you might be interested, talk to me afterwards. I'd be happy to get you information on that. But at this point, I really am very pleased to see the turnout we've got tonight. Paul and Pam are traveling around the United States here with this program. And so let me just say a word about why we're so fortunate to have them here tonight. Paul Dix worked in Nicaragua from 1985 to 1990 with Witness for Peace, a very important organization that gave witness of nonviolence and to social justice during especially the years of the U.S. support for the Contra revolutionaries against the country of Nicaragua. And he traveled throughout the country and documented many of the different effects of the war then. During that same time, Pam Fitzpatrick worked stateside staff with Witness for Peace, occasionally traveling to Nicaragua, primarily organizing delegations here in this country to make that journey, working as regional director of the Northwest office. The two of them have had a most unusual experience in the past year and a half or so. Fulfilling a long dream, they returned to Nicaragua twice since 2002 for a total of 13 months to search for a specific 100 of the thousands of people that Paul had photographed in the 1980s to obtain new photographs and testimonies about the lingering effects of U.S. policy. After much searching and investigative work, they did indeed find the majority of those 100, and those people's testimonies form the basis of the presentation we're going to have tonight. So please join me in welcoming Paul Dix and Pam Fitzpatrick here at the University.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks for your coordinating efforts and everyone else that helped put this together. Can you hear me?
Yes.
The name of the presentation, Living with the Consequences of U.S. Policy. Sadly, there are many third world countries around the world whose stories and histories could come under that same title. But we have chosen Nicaragua simply because that's where our experience has been. We've been going there for 20 years for visits and actually living there for long periods of time. The first group of slides, or you can just sit back and enjoy. They're just to give you a feeling for the country, a little bit about the cultural and geographical sense of the country. And the music will be Carlos Mejia Godoy, who is a Nicaragua composer, musician, very well known in Latin America.
We're going to turn the lights out and go through those slides, and then we'll turn the lights back on, and I'll talk a little bit while Paul's switching cassettes for the rest of the show. This song you're going to hear is very popular in Nicaragua, and it was very popular during the revolution, especially. Carlos Mejia Godoy's group is known for revolutionary music. be hanging around back and saying, now who took those pictures?
Yeah.
Well, every picture you'll see tonight, Paul took, so I'm going to be sure to do that. And one thing I didn't say before we saw those setting pictures is that Nicaragua is like two countries. You can see from the map here, you've got mountains dividing them. The Atlantic coast side is where you have most of the indigenous population. It was taken by the English in the 1600s, and the Pacific side was taken by the Spanish in the 1600s. They've always been like two countries. Even before that, they were like two countries. People on one side sometimes think you need a passport to go to the other side. So really, in Nicaragua, you get 2 for 1. It's two countries. We're going to go into a little history before we go into the testimonies, because we feel like you always have to know some context of what's going on today. It's important to have some history. And we always like to stress, especially in colleges, that this is the history that we think is true. It's based on our life experience, our years in Nicaragua, and our reading stacks of books and articles and meeting with people. But we urge you to find your truth. This is our truth. We think we're sharing the truth with you. But then you need to study and go there and find your own truth. And I would like to stress that I don't think you can find the truth unless you put your body and soul with the impoverished majority. And you can do that here or there or someplace. But you read things differently. You hear things differently once you put your body and soul with the impoverished majority here or there. For me, every time I go a little deeper. Every time I go to Nicaragua, it goes a little deeper. I'm so slow, I have to be there to get it. So, and then a disclaimer is that when we're going through the history and we show a slide of something that happened in '84, it'll be one of Paul's photos, but it'll be from something that happened after '84 that looks like what we saw, like the elections in '84. We saw lots of pictures from '84, but Paul doesn't have any photos from the election in '84, so we used a photo from 1990. It's very important that you know that he's cheating there. But it is similar to photos we saw, very similar to photos we saw from people that were there in '84. After the 13 minutes of history, we go into a few then and now photos. And that will be a person we found in black and white and made it to a black and white slide, and we follow it by that person in color. And there's no testimony for this part, just to give you a feel for some of the people we followed. And so it'll have music from a brother-sister duo called Guarabanco from Nicaragua, very well known. They go around Latin America, and they go to Chile, and 300 people will sing along with them. And you'll be hearing from the sister, Katya, and we have information on how you can get their music. After we do the then and now, we go into 11 people where we do then and now with testimony. Just a little segment of the testimony. We also like to stress that it's a sad show. It's a very heavy show, and please note, we left out the really heavy part of it. When we went to Nicaragua in the 80s, it was like they gave us a vitamin. When we were down there for these 13 months, every day was a heartbreak. Every single day was a heartbreak for us, seeing what people were having to go through. The hopeless cases we pretty much didn't include, not on purpose, but we just didn't. And then people would urge us to lighten it up, but it wouldn't be our truth if we lighten it up. It's heavy, but hopefully it'll inspire you to continue doing what you're doing, or get more organized, or inspire other people to get involved, because if we keep living the way we're living now, which is basically the majority shopping and watching TV, we're going to continue on the same path we're going on in this world. And it's not a very pretty picture for those of you that are looking a little deeper. So, and thank you for coming. There will be lots of things you can do, and Rita here is from Jubilee, the cancellation of debt. You can talk with her, and there's a table out back. From Caja, there's actions you can do, and we have information up here, so we hope that afterwards you'll be inspired to check these things out. And I have a chronic cough. I've had it for 25 years. It's not bird flu.
Question. Your pictures, were they from Managua or from Puerto Cabeza side of east or west? Most of your pictures were from the west?
Yes.
Yes.
Most of them were from the Pacific side, where most of the people live. But a few were from the East Coast, the Caribbean coast, up around Pearl Lagoon and Bluefield.
You could tell because in the East Coast, most of the houses are on stilts.
Yeah.
That's right.
And we did a really nice boat trip this time down the Rio Coco.
Okay.
And some of those, one of those pictures there. That was real special. And so we read the history, go through it as fast as we can. And now we'll turn out to
First, how many people have been to Nicaragua? That's what that is. Wow. It's really exciting that for me that you came because Nicaragua has pretty much dropped off the media map since 1990, as many of you know. So to see this much interest.
And how many have been to Central America, Mexico? So this is,
Well informed. The history now is just to give those who were born in the 80s, were born in the 80s, a little context. Otherwise, it's difficult to understand the testimonies we'll be reading.
Paul and I started doing these talks in '85, and we go to colleges. And so it's shocking to us now to go to colleges and go, heck, some of them weren't born. And while the U.S. has a long history of being involved in Nicaragua, we're only going to start in the early 1900s. But the U.S. Marines occupied Nicaragua from 1912 to 1933, guaranteeing a pro-U.S. government which would provide protection for U.S. businesses and access to a possible canal through Nicaragua. This is Sandino, a mural of Sandino. Beginning in 1926, Augusto Sandino led a guerrilla war against this U.S. occupation. 94-year-old Lorenzo Osorio is one of the men that we finally found and got some testimony from, and this is a little piece of his testimony. He's in Jalapa, and this is a testimony from 2002. I was barely 16 years old, and my job was to carry food to the outposts of General Sandino. I couldn't carry a weapon because there weren't enough. There weren't enough until the war that the U.S. imposed on us got going. Later, we were able to take rifles from the Marines and defeat the United States. Well, the Marines did finally leave Nicaragua in 1933, but before they left, they recruited, trained, and outfitted a military force called the National Guard and set up English-speaking, and I stress, English-speaking, Anastasio Somoza as the commander-in-chief. Sandino, in celebration, was invited to Managua for peace talks, but it was a trap and he was murdered. Hundreds of his followers were subsequently massacred by the National Guard. With the support of the U.S., Somoza became president. He and his sons ruled the country for the next 46 years. And during this time, the Somoza family amassed huge fortunes, and those who questioned their rule were met with severe repression by Somoza's National Guard. Up to 200,000 Nicaraguans were killed by this National Guard during those 46 years. The brutality of Somoza was well known by the leaders in the United States, but they continued to send money to the Somoza government. In words attributed to Franklin Roosevelt, Somoza may be a son of a bitch, but he's our son of a bitch. In 1961, another guerrilla group formed, the Sandinistas, or the FSLN. They took their name after Sandino and organized to overthrow the Somoza family and their National Guard. After 18 years of insurrection, and again after the deaths of many Nicaraguans, the Somoza family was forced to flee, along with much of the National Guard. And then on July 19, 1979, the Sandinista guerrillas marched into Managua and became the new government, much to the dismay of President Jimmy Carter. In spite of the fact that they only had $3 million in their bank account, when Somoza family left, they had assets of between, some say $500 million and some say $1.5 billion. But there was only $3 million in the bank account for the country to run and $1.6 billion in debt. In spite of that, the Sandinistas immediately embarked on programs that benefited the poor majority. They won international awards for their literacy campaign that reduced illiteracy from about 50% to 13%, and health campaigns that, among other successes, reduced infant mortality by 40%. This is another one of our testimonies, another one of the people that we found, and it's Florentina Perez. And she had always lived in the mountains. And this is a piece of her testimony that we have from 1990. It's not a new testimony, it's from the 1990s. She said, with the triumph of the revolution on July 19, 1979, extraordinary things began to happen in our lives. A young man from Leon came to my house and he taught us to read and write. The literacy crusade lifted us out of the darkness in which we were submerged. One of our most beautiful dreams came true, to learn to read and write. Well, these successes received little if any notice in the U.S. mainline press. But what did receive publicity was the confiscation of 2.5 million acres from the land rich, mainly the Somoza family and their cohorts. This land was then distributed amongst 45,000 land-poor families. Controversial? Yes, but very important for an agrarian society, where the vast majority of the people had been landless. While the Sandinistas implemented programs that gave priority to the poor majority, they also made mistakes, especially towards the indigenous population of Nicaragua. These mistakes were very well publicized in the United States. I do want to stress that the Sandinista government did own up to their errors, did own up to their mistakes, for that part. As the Sandinistas were redesigning their country, the U.S. government was organizing for their removal. This effort greatly increased in 1981 when President Reagan took office. The CIA recruited, trained, and armed former members of Somoza's National Guard, many of whom had fled to Honduras or Miami. This armed group, the counter-revolutionaries, or the Contra, or as Reagan called them, the freedom fighters, began attacks on civilians and the economic infrastructure of the country. On November 4th, 1984, Nicaragua had an election that President Reagan called a Soviet-style sham, but that much of the rest of the world, including official observers from Canada and Western Europe, declared free and fair. The Sandinista Party, with Daniel Ortega as its leader, won the election.
The U.S. government responded by escalating the war with its proxy army, the Contra, and they targeted the economic infrastructure of the country, such as bridges, communication systems, the fishing industry. This had been a shrimp boat. Millions of dollars worth of road construction equipment. Coffee industry. This had been a coffee warehouse. This had been a tobacco drying shed. But they especially targeted programs that were sponsored or supported by the Sandinistas. And that included children's centers such as this one. This had been a dining hall for children. Schools. Many schools were destroyed, and these were recently built schools. And 130 school teachers were killed, and many of them underwent horrendous tortures before they were killed. Also on the hit list were the health centers and the health workers.
But civilians were the primary targets. It's estimated that 30,000 Nicaraguans were killed. This man on the horse had been part of a civilian group defending his cooperative. The objective of the U.S. government, which orchestrated the operations of the Contra, was to bring as much pain, misery, and despair to the civilian population so they would ultimately oust the Sandinista Party. It was outright terrorism. Looking at the 1984 U.S. Army Training Manual, we read that terrorism is the calculated use of violence or the threat of violence to obtain goals that are political, religious, or ideological. In 1986, the World Court ruled that the U.S. had violated international law by training, arming, equipping, financing, and supplying the Contra forces. They referred to the U.S. mining of Nicaragua's harbors, the trade embargo, and the publication of a training manual instructing the Contra in acts of terrorism. The court ordered the U.S. to stop immediately and to pay reparations. The U.S. government ignored the ruling and escalated the war. And I will add that the reparations figure was placed at $17+ billion in 1986 dollars. In addition to funding, training, and directing the Contra, the U.S. government was organizing and financing political opposition to the Sandinistas. The objective was finally achieved on February 25, 1990. The Sandinista Party lost the presidential election to a coalition of conservative parties organized and funded by the U.S., the UNO Party. A demoralized populace, exhausted by nearly 10 years of war, inflation at 33,000% because of the cost of the war, a poor country of 3.5 million people against the most powerful country in the world, voted to end the war. Violeta Chamorro became the new president. The new government acted quickly to dismantle changes made during the revolution. The country was again open to free market economics and corporate globalization. Multinationals with their local affiliates moved to Managua, such as Burger King. Now you see all the major gas chains, international hotels like Holiday Inn, international banks and malls. You could fly in and go to the mall and go to the Holiday Inn and you wouldn't know whether you were here or there or what country you were in. The country was also open to foreign-owned assembly plants, often known as sweatshops here or maquiladoras or maquilas there. They pay obscenely low wages, obstruct labor organizing, and rarely follow local environmental regulations. It might look good on paper, but you go down there and you look and they are not following those environmental regulations. Nicaragua is winning the race to the bottom with some of the lowest wages in Latin America. It is now second poorest, second only to Haiti. State-owned enterprises such as telephone and electric systems have been privatized and sold to friends of the ruling party for next to nothing. In fact, they can't even track the money. They can't find the money. They don't know where it is in the budget. And now there are efforts under pressure from the International Monetary Fund to privatize water. This is happening all over the world, but it's also happening in Nicaragua. The downward spiral for the poor has been dramatic. Now, 70% of the country is trying to live on $2 or less a day, 50% on $1 or less, and 500,000 people, such as these people in the Managua dump, are trying to live on 50 cents a day or less. And things are, I mean, you have to pay, if you have to buy a notebook, a spiral notebook, a 70-page spiral notebook is 70 cents, quarter milk is 60 cents. I mean, life is not free there. There have been illegal land takeovers. People sell in the street whatever they can get their hands on, such as bags of water. Children are sent out to beg and to sell whatever food they can get their hands on. And others wash windows in a street corner for a quarter, begging for a quarter. In the 80s, especially up until 1988, when the inflation wasn't so horrible, most all children were in school. Now families have to pay a small fee for their children to attend a public school. They need to buy the uniform, the notebook, the pencils, the textbooks. These are barriers that parents that can hardly afford to feed their children can't get over. And so now it's estimated that only 29% of the children complete elementary school. In the 1980s, there was very little evidence of children begging or children living in the street, and little evidence of prostitution, illegal drug activity, or gang activity. All of these problems are clearly evident now, especially in the population centers.
This is the beginning of the pictures from the 80s. Will be in black and white, as Pam said. And the same person in color more recently, from 2002 up to the present. And there's from 13 to 20 years time lapse between the black and white picture and the color picture.
And the music is Guatemala.
En el jardín de Dios creció una flor que un colibrí sintió. Voló sobre la tierra, campos de paz y guerra, pero no encontró su flor, pero no encontró su flor. El colibrí voló sin ver atrás hacia el jardín de Dios. La flor del arco iris no era la que buscaba, ni la de más noble olor, ni la de increíble olor. El colibrí lloró detrás del sol por su adorada flor, pero habitaba dentro de su corazoncito y no la podía ver, no, y no la podía ver, no, 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 la del néctar del
I will comment on this picture because Santiago Rafael, like here in the picture, was killed after I took the picture in a contra ambush. He was in the Sandinista army. So here's his brother looking at that same picture along with his father and his mother. His father and mother gave us the testimonies. And this is Shirley Briones. I took this picture in 1985 in Yali, Nicaragua. And in 1987, she drew this picture for me. Her father had been killed defending a village just north of Yali in the department of Hinopega, and she drew this picture of her father. They brought him back in a black plastic bag. Wouldn't let the family look at the body because it took them 3 days to get the body out. But nevertheless, she drew the picture as if you could see him and wrote, like this, the dogs of Reagan killed my father in La Rica Yali, Nicaragua. And in 2002, she had her first baby, and we were down there. This, I'll start reading portions of the testimonies from these people, from the last 11. Those previous pictures were to give you an idea of the scope of the project and also why we have this dream of doing a book. This is Alexi Antonio Zuniga. He's 3 months old. He's in the lap of his 16-year-old mother, Geraldina. The picture I took in December 1987. These are the words of his father, Silvio. It was 1987, the 2nd of November at 3 a.m., a Tuesday, when the Contra attacked our cooperative, El Juste. There were only about 5 of us against 57 Contra. My wife escaped, but then came back because she thought she heard that the Contra had left. She was machine gunned from about 50 meters in the back through her stomach. She was carrying Alexi, and the bullet took off his leg. She fell down and then got up with one arm around Alexi and one arm holding her stomach. I watched all this from a hill. I wanted to go down to them, but my commander grabbed me and said I would only be killed. Later in the testimony, he says, "Then we found one of Geraldina's brothers. He was full of bullets from head to foot. The other had a bullet to the head and had been set on fire. Then we found her mother dead under a fallen house, burned. Finally, we found Geraldina. Everything that was inside her was outside." I was able to visit the family again in 1990 and found that Alexi's mother was so traumatized that she had left the family, and Alexi was being raised by his father, Silvio. In 2003, he's 15 years old, and he says, "My 4th and 5th prosthesis I got from Leon. I'm in 6th grade and would like to continue with secondary school. But here it's hard to go to school. Uniform, shoes, backpack, notebooks. I like sports. My favorite is kickball." This is Luz Mabel Lubi. I took this picture in 1987. She's 23 months old. When she was 22 months old, she lost her arm when the U.S.-funded Contra shot into her house. That was on December 8th, 1986. Luz Mabel's 12-year-old sister, Josefa, made this drawing for me of the attack. And she insisted on explaining every detail in the picture to me. She said that her 2 brothers are there at the doors, holding them shut. A Contra is throwing grenades in through the window. Another is shooting into the house and wounding Luz Mabel. Then Luz Mabel's 38-day-old sister and father on the floor dead. So in 2003, we found 17-year-old Luz Mabel with her 9-month-old daughter, Luz Noeli. She's back up in the mountains. It took us almost 5 months to find her, as we were looking for other people at the same time. She says, "We are not bad people. They did this because of jealousy. They will have to answer to God. I live peacefully. It is difficult because at times I worry about raising a child. Life isn't easy. Losing the arm changed everything. It isn't hard to walk, but to go somewhere I get help because to carry things is very difficult. I do everything. I iron, I make tortillas, I wash clothes. My father and little sister are buried in Hinokega, and my arm also is next to him."
We include segments of what happened to them in the 80s because when we took testimonies from these people, they always went over what happened to them in the 80s as if it had happened yesterday, as if they could still smell the odors of that day. So we wanted to include them in their testimonies. By the age of 13, Bismarck had survived 3 counterattacks on his community, Las Colinas, outside Yalu. And he drew this picture for Paul in March 1990, after the Sandinista Party had lost the election, you remember, to the U.S. and Contra-funded UNO party. Several days later, Bismarck caught a ride into Yali on a military truck to see his brother, who was in Yali. That's how people traveled in that area. They didn't have personal trucks. And it was the very day that the Contra were signing a ceasefire in Honduras. The Sandinistas had already done a ceasefire, and the Contra were signing a ceasefire on that very day in Honduras. And as a large group of Contra were moving through the area on their way to give up their weapons and be disarmed, they attacked the Lexus truck and 12 people were killed. This is a piece of his testimony, and he's remembering the incident. I'm leaving the truck looking for a ditch when I feel something burn me like a cigar on the side of my buttocks. I was feeling pain and vomiting blood, and my leg didn't have any feeling. I said, I'm going to die here. Then, when the Contra said they were going to clean up those of us that were alive, I covered my head. I stayed with my mouth down. When I felt them kick me in the head, I said, now they are going to kill me. But I didn't moan or move. Well, the Contra did leave, and help did come from Yali, and they loaded Bismarck on a truck with dead bodies, thinking he was dead. But luckily, a nurse, as they were unloading the bodies, noticed he was alive. He's now, this is a 2005 photo in Esteli. He's now 27 years old. He's absolutely delightful. Everybody loves Bismarck. He's just incredible. He's married and has 3 children. And he lives in what is now a very rough, dangerous, gang-infested community on the outskirts of Esteli. And in May 2002, he was sitting near his house on a bench eating a mango. As a gang approached, he wasn't the least bit worried because everybody loves Bismarck. But the gang picked up rocks and absolutely shattered his skull. On the ride in the ambulance from Esteli to Managua, with his mother praying over him constantly, the ambulance driver again declared Bismarck dead. Wanted to take him back to Esteli and bury him, but his mother insisted they continue. He's only able to work part-time. He suffers from weakness due to the intestinal damage from the 1990 attack. And then he's got constant headaches and dizziness from the head injury. His head is shattered. You touch his head, it's like putting your hand in a bucket of ice cubes. But because he's so delightful, he was able to find his part-time work. Maria Auxiliadora, also in the Yali area. And this is a photo from her in 1987 when she was 8 years old and had been moved into an orphanage in the town of Yali. She's referring to the attack that she survived. An attack by the Contra at 6 in the morning. My father, the leader of the cooperative, died. 3 months after they killed my father, they killed my brother. He was in the military, 22 years old. After my father died, we moved into the town of Yali. When my father died, it left my mother alone. We were 4 little children. 2 went to the orphanage, and 2 stayed with her. In this photo in 2003, she's 25 years old, and we took the photo in a restaurant because she lives in a very extremely dangerous community outside Managua that she never wanted us to bring cameras or anything of value into the community. It's called Milagro de Dios, and people figured it was a miracle of God that people went into the community and out alive, whether you lived there or visited. So it's sad to see her living in that kind of community. A piece of her testimony. I've been in Managua now for 6 years. My son is 7 years old and in 2nd grade. It's hard for kids to go to school. Elementary school costs 10 cordobas a month. That's about 70 cents. Then the uniform, shoes, backpack, notebook, everything. She had just started working in this maquila when we were visiting her in 2003, and when we visited her in 2005, she was still at the same maquila. It's hard work. I work from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. I leave the house at 6 a.m. to get to the free trade zone. Almost all the workers are women. The majority of the owners are from Taiwan. I inspect clothes. I'm on my feet all day. I earn 950 cordobas a month. That's about $63 a day, or $63 a month, or $3 a day.
Notice the two security guards coming to kick me off the ground.
18-year-old Carmen and 49 other civilians were in a public transportation truck on October 20th, 1986, traveling in the Phantasma Valley when it hit a Contra-placed anti-tank mine. 43 were wounded, 11 had to undergo amputations, and 6 were killed. Husband and wife doctor team that now lives in Coeur d'Alene from the United States were the first doctors to the scene hours after the incident. She's remembering that incident here. But it was most difficult when I realized I had lost my feet. I would like to be equal to a good person. I would like at the very least to work, to study, to be an important person. But with my difficulties, they don't help me to improve myself. 2002 photo, she's in this photo 34 years old, visiting her mother in Mantagapa. When I began with this new prosthesis, I began to bleed and be inflamed. I have this abscess that torments me. I haven't had surgery because it's very difficult here. One has to pay for everything, has to buy the anesthesia, everything. Sometimes I'm calm, and then it feels like something hits me in my heart, and I gasp, and I cry, and I cry, and I cry.
Juana Hernandez in Condega. This picture I took in '86. This is part of her testimony. It was dawn, December 27th, 1985. The Contra had the house surrounded. 8 of us escaped. My husband, Eleuterio, they opened him with a bayonet. They took out his heart, his tongue. They didn't shoot, only with bayonets. My son, yes, they shot him in the leg. He was able to drag himself, and he got to that place. Then they saw he was alive, and they ended him with bullets. It's difficult for a single woman to face all the difficulties. But one has to forgive. Sometimes it's difficult. My mother, the mother of the young man that killed my husband, didn't speak to me. I'd meet her on the street and say hello to her, but she wouldn't speak. Later she did say hello. She changed. But the son, the one who killed my husband, no, he's never spoken to me. This is surviving son Mauricio on the Day of the Dead in 2002 at the graves of his father and his brother. He says, I remember running with only my pants on, no shirt, no shoes. One cousin and 2 friends were with the Contra that night. I don't feel any strong hatred for them. In reality, God has strengthened me and given me new life. Now the main problem is the economy. There's no work. When there is work, the pay is very low. It's not enough to buy the things one needs. There's a hospital, but if you don't have money, you can't have medicine. It's very difficult. The politics are against the poor. I remember that during the war, in the hospital, there was free medicine and school was free. Now you have to pay for everything. And now we live in peace, not war. This is Tomas Ramon Alvarado. This is a 1990 photograph of Tomas. It's a pre-election pro-Sandinista demonstration. In 2002, he's looking at this picture and says, in this photo, I had already been in the wheelchair for about 6 years. In those years, the 1980s, we were favored by the government. The wheelchair, healthcare, and transportation. We didn't have to worry, nor did our families. We didn't pay for water or electricity, and if we did pay, it was subsidized. When we lost the elections in 1990, it was very painful for us, because we had centered our hope on a change for the majority. For this, we had participated in the revolutionary struggle. Then, after 1990, each one of us had to hang on by his own fingernails. Each one had to overcome his own problems alone.
a 1988 photo of Connie Perez. New Year's Eve 1984, when Connie was 4 years old, she lost her father, Jose Angel, and her 20-year-old polio-crippled sister, Zunilda, while they were defending their cooperative New Year's Eve from a Contra-attack. This is a photo that Paul took in 1990 of Connie's mother, Florentina. And this was taken after the Sandinistas had lost power to the U.S.-supported UNO party, and Florentina is commenting about that. This is the worst thing your government has done to me. This is worse than when I lost my husband and daughter. When they killed Jose and Zunilda, they took from me personally. It was my individual loss. But now they've taken my people's freedom. They've stolen our hope. They've taken the whole dream away. A 2002 photo of 21-year-old Connie. And she's remembering an incident from when she was 7 years old. After my father died, I always was glued to men because I felt the lack of Papa. After Papa died, I was with my godfather Mauricio, but then the Contra killed him also. Danielle, a man from the United States, came. He was walking with me on his shoulders, and suddenly I asked him, Danielle, why did the United States kill my Papa and my sister and my godfather? Why don't you tell them not to do that anymore? He didn't answer me. And then later in her testimony, she goes on to say, in the United States live children that don't know anything about what their country does in other countries. I think it's terrible that the young people are growing up thinking their country is perfect. This is a 2005 photo of Florentina in front of a house that has a mural that Zunilda did. They keep the murals up. And it's the community of Lagartillo, and it's an amazing community. There's some information on the table. I hope there might still be some there. There's a health program that a friend of mine is helping to fund, and an education program. And the community itself is now running a Spanish language school where you could go there and study Spanish and do a homestay in a very interesting community. If you're interested, come talk to me. This is Cristina Borge, and it's a 1985 photo, and she's referring to a 1984 incident. I was at my aunt's house. The Contra came, they raped her, killed her, raped my 14-year-old cousin, killed her. I ran. The other Contra shot me in the head, the hip, the right hand, and one bullet went through my chest. And then when Paul met with her again in 1987, she did a drawing. And on one of our more recent trips, she's looking at that drawing from '87 and referring to it. She says, here, I was left for dead. And then another part of the same drawing. This one, here, with his head on the fence, my cousin. He had 3 little children, 2 bigger and 1 still nursing. They had killed the mother and the father, and the little one couldn't stop crying, wanting to nurse. The mother was dead, the father was dead, the grandfather was dead, all dead. My aunt dead, my cousin, another uncle. Twice my family thought I had died. They washed my wounds 3 times a day with gasoline. After 3 weeks, Padre Jaime, a U.S. priest shown here on the mural that worked in Paiwas, heard about me, and he thought I'd die without medical help. He came with armed guards to take me by horseback, then dugout canoe, then motorboat, then ambulance to the hospital in Nicaragua. Every movement hurt. In a 2002 photo, my husband had to go to Costa Rica to find work. Now we live there with our 2 children. There's no work here in Nicaragua. I was skinny and the children were always sick. I can't work because of my headaches, and my right hand hurts when I use it very much. For the Contra, I feel no animosity in my heart. I only ask, why were these people unjust?
This is Yamilet Mendieta. She's at the burial of her mother, Carmen Mendieta, December 1987 in Bocana de Paiwas. She's 15 years old and the oldest of 6 children. She says, We are aware of who killed my mother, yes, we know, but we don't feel hatred toward them. The only ones we hate are the gringos, because the gringos were the ones that made Nicaragua divide itself, that supported the Contra, that gave them arms. I won't forget when Fernando Canales caught a gringo and took him away tied up, and we saw Hasenfuss on television. It was evidence that the gringos were behind all of this, and that the Contras were also victims of the gringos, and that we, the Sandinistas, well, we just had to defend ourselves because we had no other alternative. For that reason, I don't hate the Contra, but nor do I like them. This is a picture from a scrapbook, a family scrapbook, of her mother, Carmen Mendieta. Carmen Mendieta was an amazing woman, loved and respected by the community, and was clearly one of the best organizers in Nicaragua. Yamilet is now 30, and she's continued in her mother's footsteps. She's dynamic, strong, intelligent, capable, has a wonderful sense of humor. She's founder and director of the community radio station, Palabra de Mujer, that covers an area around Paiwas, a community that only has one telephone. And the radio station has been very important in organizing a campaign against a proposed dam that would flood Paiwas. At the end of her testimony, she says, "Truly, the only ones guilty for the war here were the North Americans. Therefore, it is them who I hate, because they have been the ones that have done it, that have marked our faces with lines of pain, of sadness, of nostalgia, of anguish from so many things." Tránsito Suárez Amador. I took this picture in 1985, April 85, in a town called Rio Blanco. And it was just a month after this incident that he describes. The Contra came in the house and grabbed me while I was asleep. They took me out naked with just my shoes on. Later they took my son, then my wife, my nephew, and my 16-year-old daughter. I later escaped. We found my wife that same day. She had slashes on her arms and legs and was stabbed in her heart and face. The next day we found my son and my nephew. The Contra had slit their throats. My wife was a member of a health brigade, and my son was a member of an education brigade teaching adults. That was the crime, not anything else. A little later in his testimony, he's referring to a $14 million aid package that the U.S. Congress voted for the Contra. He says, "If I could write to President Reagan, I would ask him to send the $14 million here for books and medical supplies. The children here need school and medical supplies. All we are doing is working to feed our families. If we Nicaraguans die of hunger, it will be Reagan's fault. Reagan's work here in Nicaragua is a plague on the people, a plague that comes from Honduras and Costa Rica." That's where the Contras were trained. "A financing of death." Then we visited Tránsito just this last spring, this year, and he was trying to survive on 20 cordobas a day. That's just a little over $1 a day, selling raw cane sugar sweets at a bus station in Rio Blanco. He said, 20 pesos, imagine, it makes me ashamed. They asked me, since all the bus drivers know me, they asked me how much I earn. Man, I earn 60 cordobas, I say. I lie, because I'm ashamed to say the amount that I earn. I'm embarrassed over what I earn. I say I earn 60 pesos. It's a lie. I earn 20. Yes, only 20. This is the last picture of the presentation. It's 15-year-old Edwin Uriel Gonzalez, 15 years after the Contra War officially ended in 1990. 1990. And It was this year on January 13th that he picked up an object. It was in the dark. He was thinking it might be a flashlight. It was an anti-personnel mine. He lost one eye, severely damaged the other, and as you can see, lost both hands. Carlos Powell, an Argentine writer who lives in Nicaragua, wrote this: "It is much easier to begin a war than end it, and even more difficult to repair the invisible marks that can never be erased from the soul."
I guess our main comment is it doesn't have to be this way. You've all heard another world is possible, but it will take all of us to make that other world possible. People have things they want to say, or questions.
It's an election coming up pretty soon. When is that?
It'll be in
The
November.
question is there an election coming up in Nicaragua?
It'll be November 2006.
I saw a comment in our local newspaper that the United States had said that if the government was changed, if the present government goes down, they're going to reduce or cancel the Jubilee money, the money
Debt
to
relief.
pay the
Debt
debts.
relief.
Is that true?
Have you read that, Rita?
You know, I just wrote to Bob in the news that we wanted to ask her, and I didn't get a response, but that's what's just happening more tenure, that because they are electing a government that we're not having, that we're suggesting that we're going to not give them the GA debt relief. So I'm sure it's right. I mean, I have no doubt.
That's what they did in the past. In the past, in the 1990 election, they said, the U.S. government said that if the Sandinistas win, they wouldn't get aid, and there was the understanding that the war would be escalated.
And the war will continue.
So,
But they have blatantly intervened in all the elections. There's been 3 elections since the Sandinistas were in power. The U.S. has supported the opposition, has started rumors, like perhaps this rumor about debt relief, and even things like that the Sandinistas are international terrorists.
How does it look down there for the election?
how does it look?
Well, it's still quite a way away, but you hear a lot about it. It's
It's November.
Next November.
Oh,
it's quite complicated. You might say there's just political chaos right now in Nicaragua. The liberals, there's a liberal party and a conservative party, traditionally. And I'm not sure, the liberals might be more conservative than conservatives. Anyway, when you say liberal there, it doesn't mean they're liberal. And the Liberal Party has fragmented, mainly due to the imprisonment of Alemán, who is the former president of Nicaragua. He stole between $100 million and $300 million from coffers of Nicaraguan people. And he's in prison, but he's actually at home in his palace, but he can't leave. And the U.S. supported him. The U.S. supported the president that's now in power, Bolaños. And there is one thing as far as the Sandinistas go. Daniel Ortega sort of has a stranglehold on that party. And he and Alemán, believe it or not, are making pacts and changing the Constitution and basically trying to solidify their power. But there's something else is happening. There are other parties, and the former Sandinista mayor of Managua wants to run for president. And he couldn't convince Daniel Ortega to have primaries in the Sandinista party. So he's right now possibly joining up with the another party. There's one called the Sandinista movement, Sandinista Reformation. And he started a movement called the Sandinismo Rescue Movement. So there are a lot of people who are now, they still say they're Sandinistas, but not Danielistas. They don't like Daniel, but they still believe in the revolution.
I want to just add a little bit. Our last ambassador there, Barbara Moore, who just left recently, would be very open with all the press that the U.S. will do whatever it needs to do to keep the Sandinistas out of power. I mean, that's just shocking. What if an ambassador from another country came here and said, we'll do whatever we can do to keep Bush, to get Bush out of power, to get, you know. They're very above board. They say it to the press regularly that we want the Sandinistas to be kept out of power. And the other, I want to give an example of, you just can't follow, if you're just following mainline media, you just can't get the story. In the 1980s, Daniel Ortega went to Europe and he came back when he was president. He came back with designer sunglasses. And in those designer sunglasses, he was on the cover of Newsweek and Time, and they were making fun of him, saying, this man says he stands for the poor, but look at him, he's wearing designer sunglasses. Now, I don't remember seeing Aleman on the cover of Newsweek or Time, but he's convicted of stealing at least 100 million, maybe 300 million of the government's money. He's supposed to be in jail for 20 years, but he's in his palace and he's not going to be able to roam around Managua. But you don't see that on the cover of Time or Newsweek. So often it's not what is said, but what's not said. That's why you can't get the story in mainline media.
And our point is that we're not saying who should win the elections, but we think we feel very strongly about the U.S. meddling in their affairs and not treating Nicaragua as a sovereign country.
Where do you guys get your news? Like, where is a good place to get news about Latin?
Well, I have some websites up there, if you want to, like Nika Network, and we get it from just a variety. Do you have a favorite place, Dan? And we like Nation and In These Times, and you read from a variety, a vast variety, but if you're just going to read, I think, like I do read Wall Street Journal, and I do read New York Times to see how it's being presented. And you can get some information, but it's always presented from a certain perspective. Like last night, we were at the Jeanette Rankin Peace Center, and I picked up a book by Carter, and I was reading his couple pages on Nicaragua. It was just shocking. It's like that man worked in a different country than we visited, and he's considered an expert on Nicaragua. But he doesn't come from the perspective of the poor majority, and that's what we keep saying. The changes that have to happen in this world will come from all of us taking bigger steps to be body and soul with the poor majority so that we can hear and read and see things differently.
And here's an excellent book that just came out a couple years ago, Nicaragua, Living in the Shadow of the Eagle by Thomas Walker. Highly recommend it.
Any more student questions?
So if Ortega, through the 80s, and the Sandinistas were carrying the moral, political, and social high ground in the revolutionary cause, who's carrying the high ground today, and what is the high ground? Because obviously they're probably going to have a hard time carrying forth socialist principles with the indoctrination of the capitalist anti-Sandinista movement that's been so successful. So who's carrying the high ground, politically, socially, in any movement right now?
Well, I don't know any one person other than Lewites, who was the former mayor of Managua, and who's trying to save Sandinismo. I would say that the FSLN, the Sandinistas, still draw most of their support from the grassroots, from the poor majority. And when we were there, they had elections for mayors all around the country, and the Sandinistas did very, very well. Very well. They got the majority of the mayorships. But as far as the high ground, I don't know. There's right now, it's a struggle, power struggles, intrigues, all kinds of messy stuff going on in Managua, and while the poor majority are getting more and more desperate.
That's the wrong question to ask. And it's a question we ask as USers all the time, and it makes it so we don't understand other countries or movements. We think that there should be a leader, someone you can point a finger to, but in movements there are hundreds of leaders. And that's how a movement works well. When you get, if you ever did in a movement have a leader, then it would fall apart. In this country, we think that King was leader of the civil rights movement, and he was not anywhere near being a leader. In fact, he was considered not trustable by most black people. But our way of looking at the civil rights movement today is that he was the leader, and there were hundreds of leaders. And it's the same in every revolution that they've had in Nicaragua, is that there have been many leaders coming from many quarters, from the slums in Managua, from the East Coast, Puerto Cabello, and Greenfield, and the East, just all over the country. So we may distill it down to who we think are leaders because they look like USers. And they are people that we can agree with their thinking. But that's not who the leaders are. And so we need to get away from this thing of finding this focal person that we can attach ourselves to and be much bigger than that. We have to be bigger to understand what's going on in a country like this. That's why the hardships are so hard there. Everyone on blocks, they'll have leaders. In a slum, they'll have leaders. So we need to think bigger, see things much bigger.
That's what I was thinking last night. Why are we so disempowered?
Yeah.
You know, why we can do a lot. There's a lot we can do, but we feel hopeless and we keep thinking somebody else has to lead us. And that's exactly, I think, what you're saying. And then when I would go to Nicaragua in the 80s, everybody was organizing. And people say now, yeah, people are organizing now, but it's really a very small percent organizing now because they've been beaten down by us. I mean, it was, we let our government do this somehow. They tried to do some changes, and we will never know what might have happened in those changes. It is our fault. Y'all maybe were born, but somehow we have to stop our government from implementing these policies that don't let people become empowered, and to let people in the U.S. become empowered. So we're empowered in our neighborhoods, so that we stop these corporations from pumping out our groundwater and selling it, or whatever is going on, just so we get empowered. Did you want to say anything?
I wanted to ask a question. When I was there, I was mainly on the East Coast, and mainly in Puerto Cabello most of the time, in Managua only for a few days. And it was very different in 95 in Puerto Cabello because they didn't have much, but everybody had what they had. And you talk about transportation, the big trucks will go through, and some of the huge Russian trucks left from the revolution will go through, and everybody just jumps in. And I was sitting down there setting up healthcare and nutrition programs. But everybody participated in everything in that town. Has it changed on the East Coast?
I hate to be so pessimistic. Actually, it's gotten worse. Economically, all of Nicaragua, including the East Coast, in fact, especially the East Coast, is spiraling downward. But some interesting things are happening. They have, and this started during the Sandinistas in '87. They formed two autonomous regions that take up geographically quite a bit of Nicaragua, but as far as population, not that much. But so they are doing a lot of things, being governed by regional councils, and they are getting money. Well, like all of Nicaragua, a major part of their money is of their foreign currency from remittances. People who had to leave and are working in the States or Costa Rica or somewhere and sending money home. And especially in blue fields and Puerto Cabezas, a lot of people are working on cruise ships in the Caribbean, winter areas in the Caribbean, doing domestic help, this sort of thing, sending money back. That, and there is some drug money now since the 90s. East Coast has become a major transshipment area for cocaine from Colombia. So every once in a while in the small little towns with just shacks, suddenly there's this two-story nice house. Well, they probably found a bag of white stuff along the beach.
Their drug connection is finding the money, finding the packets. A drug ship has been chased, they've thrown the drugs over shore. And so, like you might go hunting mushrooms, they go hunting little packets of gold, essentially. And then they can afford to have a little house. But have you heard of I'm forgetting whether it's public law 448 or 484, or there was the indigenous rights on the Atlantic coast was started under the Sandinista government, and recently it's been moved forward so that some of the areas have been proclaimed indigenous and they will stay indigenous and they cannot be sold to non-indigenous. So there has been some movement along there. Why don't we just take a couple more questions, and then people need to feel free to roam around, and we're happy to stay here until tomorrow morning talking. So the very back, and then
Consider taking your case from some of the aggressive outlets that we have nationally, such as Democracy Now, or any human program, or Al Franken, or some of the others, so you get your message transmitted over and above the usual media.
that's a good idea.
But not radio.
But
That would be
Democracy Now! Is on cable TV. So. Thank you.
Yeah, the gentleman. Yes.
I'm not sure I have a good feel for what the major advantage to our country has been over the years to do the kinds of things that apparently have happened. Can we have a little discussion or some kind of a statement about that?
Why?
Why?
Why was Reagan and the elder Bush obsessed with getting rid of the Sandinistas?
Yeah.
That was my question too when I
But we're
first
starting in
started.
1912.
Even before that, and why couldn't we let Guatemala in '54 have a different type of government? And why couldn't we let? There's a really interesting book called Endless Enemies by Jonathan Whitney, a writer for Wall Street Journal. And it goes through country by country by country of how, a country starts making changes for self-determination and more of the resources staying in the country, and the U.S. overthrows the government like we did in Guatemala. And then you get a government in there that hooks up with a terrible military and kills 200,000 people, and it's just horrendous. And why do we do it? I don't think it helps any of us in this room. I think it's policies that the U.S. government has put in, like, they weren't in Nicaragua to help the average person in the United States in the 1900s. There was talk of maybe having a coffee cartel, it's just the U.S. wanted to keep control in the 1900s and keep it stable for some small U.S. businesses. There wasn't even that much business there. But it meant that the people of Nicaragua couldn't organize. Anytime they start organizing, making a little bitty step to be empowered and do something, they get squashed. And you have a long history. You talk with the mothers now. 2005, they lost their kids. They spent all these years like Bismarck's family up in the cooperative La Gartia that they had 3 attacks on. After 1990, they lost that. They lost that cooperative. People had been there for 10 years tending coffee plants. They had put body and soul into that land. And then when our government I'm convinced our government is the reason that there was a change in the election because of everything that our government was paying to have happen in that country during those years. They lost everything. And now they live, Bismarck's mother lives in a little shack. We go to visit her. She has no food in the house. She has nothing. She has 3 little kids she's taking care of. You go in that house and you can see she has nothing. She gets no government help, no nothing. They tried their hardest. We do it country after country after country, and it doesn't help those of us in this room. I'm convinced it's just helping, now it's helping the corporations, the multinational corporations. And we've got information over there on WTO and all that. But do you want to say anything, Dan? You're so serious and articulate.
No, I mean, I think you said it very, very well. I want to basically thank you again for this powerful testimony. So overwhelmed with the images and stories. And I don't know if you have anything you want to leave us with to end about what are some concrete action things that we can be doing in this. There are several of us in the room who try to do different things, and a part of what we're doing in education is trying to get people to have first-hand experiences in it so we can begin to work on that. But there are lots of things we can do in our communities here. I don't know if you want to leave us with some suggestions on where to go.
I'll do that because I'm the organizer. So, Paul and I both work with Witness for Peace, and we really love Witness for Peace. And Missoula has the Montana coordinator for Witness for Peace, and he'll be back at the back table with the CAHA, Community Action for Justice in the Americas. And his name is Jay Bostrom. If you'd like to go on a Witness for Peace, that doesn't have to be Witness for Peace, but I'll push Witness for Peace, and we have some newsletters over there. Or go on a global Center for Global Education. It's an excellent group to go with. I don't think going as a tourist is going to get you to the insight that you want. Debt relief is essential. The debt relief they have so far is like saying, Paul and I owe $1 billion, and Paul and I live in a house less than 1,000 square feet, and we drive a 1977 truck. And we live pretty simply. And it's like saying, Paul and Pam, you no longer owe $1 billion, you now only owe $1 million, but since you only owe us $1 million, now you have to give us your firstborn child or whatever. There's all these conditionalities on it. And what we're fighting, and so Nicaragua has had great debt relief, but there's no more money going into education. There's very little going into health care. It's not there. So work with Rita, if you could raise your hand.
We're going to meet tomorrow night at UCC at 6:30. I'm part of Jubilee, Montana. I'm on the national board for Jubilee. And like Magda Melissa said, when she was here in April, she's from Nicaragua, they have paid their debts 7 times over. They no longer owe, but they're paying with their lives. And if you have someone from Latin America here, that's one of the things they always say, work to cancel that debt, because it's economic warfare. It's a pillage. It's just as devastating, killing as many people. 27,000 children die every day due to debt because of preventable diseases and poor water. This is a silent tsunami every single week around the world, and it's happening in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Pacific. And so it's really, really important that we work in partnership with Jubilee in Latin America, well, around the world, and that's what Jubilee USA does. We take our leadership from the South, from the global South, and then we press Congress and our Treasury. And there's bills before Congress right now, and we're trying to get Max Baucus. We've given him almost 100 letters. We gave that many to Rehberg, and we hear no response. But I actually have met with the Treasury, the finance, Max Baucus is the chief Democrat for finance, and I met with his aide. And apparently Baucus really wants to reach this, and because this is both a secular and an issue that faith communities get around, he apparently wants to outreach to faith communities, and that we have Jubilee congregations. There's lots of peace and justice groups working on it, but it's also going through the churches because of Leviticus and Deuteronomy, the whole thing about canceling debts, let people begin anew and restore the world and right relationships. So there is an end. We can work on it, and because we're becoming Jubilee, Montana, we now have more power. Because coming from Missoula, Max Baucus was kind of ignoring us. Now that we're from in the Bitterroot and Bozeman, he's really taking a lot more interest. So join Jubilee. It's a really great movement and really important, and like I said, we're in partnership with people from around the world.
And you're really lucky to have a local group, the local contact with and the local group at the back outside the CAHA group to plug you into actions here, buy some coffee. We have to get educated on the trade agreements. CAFTA, Central America Free Trade Agreement, just passed in the U.S. It was an arm twister. It got bought. It is going to be deadly. It is horrendous. It means that the U.S. subsidizes, we subsidize our agribusiness. Other countries subsidize their farmers, but the U.S., a higher percentage of our money goes to subsidies for agribusiness. How is that helping people in this room? How does it help us to spend our tax dollars subsidizing agribusiness that can then get 80% of the cost of growing rice, for example, paid by subsidy, ship it to Nicaragua, and sell it in Nicaragua cheaper than what the Nicaraguan farmers can grow it for? So you have these people that were growing rice, feeding their families, making a little bit of money to pay for the medicine, just a little bit. They don't have running water, electricity. They're just getting by. And now we're wiping that out. It's the big guys. It's always the big guys. And so we have to get on top of the World Trade Organization, the trade agreements. There's information over there on the free trade agreements in the area of the Americas. It gets complicated. It looks complicated. And that keeps us from being involved in it. But we need to get involved in it and maybe go on a delegation that's focused on it so we can start acting here.
Maybe just mention one other thing, and then we'll wrap it up for the evening here, but I think that part of what's so powerful about the presentation was this is an ongoing legacy that's going for 20, 25 years now, and the people, they're still living with the consequences. It's not in the news here, but they're living with the consequences. The other thing was just a few days ago, CAHA put on Community Action for Justice Americas, put on a wonderful presentation in the same room about what's happening today in Colombia. Scott Nicholson, if you just raise your hand, Scott is here from CAHA, but talk about deja vu all over again. What the Contras and stuff were doing 20 years ago, the paramilitaries are doing today. These issues are creating future legacies of the same kind of thing we're talking about here. And so we have to find some way of both addressing what our responsibility is for the last 20 or 30 years. And debt relief, I think, with Jubilee is a wonderful way to begin working on that. But also be aware that this is not a former policy. These are still going on in country after country of the world. So we've got to get educated and figure out how to really address those. I think at this point, we probably should wrap up the formal part of the presentation. Let me give one more round of thoughts and thanks.